Morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We have Deputy Premier and Minister of Finance, Donna Harpauer, as well as Deputy Minister of Finance, Max Hendricks. We'll have opening comments from Minister Harpauer, and then we will go to questions. Minister Harpauer?
So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us to discuss this year's mid-year report. At mid-year, a $250.5 million deficit is forecast, which is down $1.3 billion from budget. Two large factors outside of the government's control play into this forecast. Potash prices and sales have been impacted by challenging global market conditions, which has significantly reduced resource revenue. And higher crop insurance claims due to the severe drought that hit parts of the province are significantly increasing expenses. Despite these challenges, our fiscal picture is solid. More people than ever are living and working in Saskatchewan, and our economy is resilient. Total revenue is forecast to increase at mid-year over budget by $35.2 million. Mainly corporate income tax revenue and provincial sales tax revenue are showing the strength of our economy, and other categories are contributing as well to about $753 million in increases over budget. But almost entirely offsetting that good news is a $717.8 million decrease in the forecast for resource revenue, mainly potash, as prices and production have experienced significant decrease. As a result, resource surcharge revenue is down as well. Total expense is up $1.3 billion from budget. Agriculture expense is forecast to be $853 million higher than budgeted, as mentioned, largely due to crop insurance claims as well as other support programs for producers. It is a direct result of the severe drought that hit parts of the province in the summer. I want to be clear that we are not attributing this deficit to producers. Summary financial reporting imposes certain budgeting standards. The funds for crop insurance claims are available. However, the drawing down of the funds must be recorded as an expense. I would like to emphasize the importance of fully funding these supports programs for industry and producers, as this continues to be a very vital sector for our province. Also, we have higher non-cash expense related to the adjustments to the Saskatchewan Teacher Superannuation Plan and the Public Service Superannuation Plan, our closed plans, which remain largely the same as we reported at the first quarter. And we have higher than budget expense for wildfire response and evacuations, which we also talked about at the first quarter. We continue to plan to retire $1 billion in operating debt in 2023-24. We can do that because of the strong cash balance that are from our province's previous fiscal year. And Saskatchewan's net debt to GDP ratio is expected to be 13.3%, second best among Canadian provinces this fiscal year, and an important improvement from budget. Our population topped 1.2 billion in July after the largest single year increase in population, 30,685 since 1914. A record 605,300 people are working in our province in October, when our unemployment rate of 4.4% was the lowest among provinces and well below the national average of 5.7%. Saskatchewan has the highest economic growth among provinces in 2022, with 6% real GDP growth. An average of private sector forecasts has Saskatchewan's economic growth at the second highest among the provinces in each of the next 2 years, with real GDP growing by 1.6% in 2023 and 1.3% in 2024. Our province's fiscal position is strong and our economy is resilient. And thank you very much for attending, and with that, I'll take questions.
Madam Minister, how are you going to address the structural problems in the budget? Your officials aren't categorizing this as a structural deficit. Some might argue that, there's still fundamental structural problems with crop insurance, with other things. Do we need to relook at the royalties? Do we need to look at crop insurance premiums? Do we need to relook at capital spending, which seems to be the considered points in the changes today?
You know, we've had some extreme swings in our budgets in the last few budgets, and none of them, I would say, would be structural, Murray. We're looking at a pandemic, which of course brought the fiscal position of the province down because the economy was slowed down. Then we had it bounce back because of global unrest, and that's when our resource revenue bounced up to extreme levels. And then we had the largest or the most catastrophic drought, which brought it down again. Those are all extreme events, which are, you know, create swings in the budget. But when you look at what is historical averages over the last 10 years of revenue coming in and expenses going out, I wouldn't say we have a structural difficulty yet. But we do need to watch it closely for sure.
How are you going to address the immediate? Because we're in a consistent situation where deficits largely outnumber surpluses right now, and generally it tends to be the inconsistency of resource prices. The last time we ran into this problem, it was getting crop insurance. But do we need to specifically address that? Does the government need to address its capital spending?
You know, because of the nature of summary financial statements, this deficit could be addressed if we didn't have to take on the pension liability that we took on, which is not real cash expenditure. It's a future liability, but it has to be accounted for in summary financial statements. So that pension adjustment alone almost covers the deficit.
When you say the fiscal picture is solid, the people will see the forecast go from $1 billion surplus to the deficit that we see today. What are you basing that fiscal positivity on? What can you tell people about that?
The strength of the economy, I think, is the positive message here. The still solid position, we're the second lowest of debt to GDP. And again, I said it would, the pension liability alone would cover the deficit, and the pension liability is not a cash outlay, but it isn't something that you have to account for. It actually is more than what the deficit is. So, you know, it's something that we had to account for due to interest rates, but if that wasn't in there, we'd still be in a surplus position.
Did you miscalculate or misjudge the international markets when it comes to potash, and what was going to happen with China and India going back to Russia?
And we relied totally on the forecasts of the industry themselves. And so I don't think they were certain of when the market would go back to Russia and Belarus. And, you know, the sanctions, I dare to say, I think they're probably finding ways through the back door to get the product moved that they can't through the front door. And I don't think the industry knew how to predict that.
Is there a way the government can combat that, whether the provincial government or the Canadian government, through trying to, I know we try and market our products, and I've heard the pitch, is that something that would help this situation a little bit?
I believe the fact that we are definitely, you know, doing the outreach internationally to make, you know, the global markets aware of what we have to offer, and, you know, the carbon footprint is becoming more and more important of our products. So I think that makes the global market more aware of what we have here in Saskatchewan. But nonetheless, price still does somewhat drive where markets will go. And Russia and Belarus are putting product on at a cheaper price.
You love a tax cut in the budget. Have you thought about that at all? Does this change anything in that calculation?
We actually don't look at, like, we look at the tax suite with each and every budget as we put budgets together. And that will be later in the budget process and kind of a last minute when we get our last forecasts in. Looking at it right now, in the position right now, if that follows through to the budget, I would say it's not likely that we could do any tax cuts in this budget. But, you know, we are very early in our budget deliberations, and we'll see where the economy goes.
I think that's going to be acceptable to people because you've been under considerable pressure from the opposition and maybe others with opinions on cutting the TST and everything else. I guess in some ways that vindicates some of the decisions that you made.
Well, you know, there is no doubt that there's inflationary pressures with people right now. But right now, we have, the lowest personal income tax. We can go lower and beat ourselves on going low. Of the provinces that have PST, we have the lowest PST in the country. So we have made cuts that we carry forward each and every year. But as I said, with each budget, we look at what available space do we have, and we are aware that affordability is an issue. The cost of fuel, the cost of food has definitely gone up. We'll continue to pressure the federal government, obviously, to discontinue the carbon tax, which we think is a large driver in that inflationary costs. But we do recognize it, and we'll be discussing that through the budget process.
How is this going to affect your budgeting going forward?
Each year, like this is where we are at a moment in time now with the data that we have. But again, we'll be looking at what is the forecast as we form a budget. What is the forecast for the next fiscal year? And we'll be looking for resource revenue. We'll be looking to the industries to give those projections. We'll be looking at our history and our taxation and making projections accordingly. And it'll depend on industry. And as I said, the indicators right now are very strong, which speaks to the fact that there will be job creation, which increases our personal income tax, jobs available, which increases PST, because when people have good jobs, then they have more money to spend. So all those factors are taken into consideration in the deliberations of budgets.
And the cash used to pay down $1 billion in debt, is that cash coming from 2022, 23?
Well, it's a continual cash flow, but definitely we were in a very strong cash position when we had year end of 22, 23.
Okay, but none of the cash from this budget is forecast to go to debt reduction.
Actual cash flow, I'll turn to my official, is 2 moments in time.
No, we used it's difficult to say, like, well, obviously, we have cash that we hold on hand, and so we use that to pay down the $1 billion of debt. And so we like to maintain a certain level of cash so that when we're not forced into markets at bad prices, when we go to secure debt, that sort of thing. So we are borrowing an additional $800 million for the capital plan, but our operating expenditure is even, and we're not borrowing on our operating expense.
Is it disappointing to be presenting these numbers now when at budget you had $1 billion surplus to use?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's, and again, out of my, government's control. So it is disappointing, but as I said, but I'm still very optimistic because of the strength that we're seeing in all of our economic indicators. And I'll go back to my farming day. Droughts don't last forever. And so hopefully we're back to a, more average year or a good year next year. The potash, just listening to the industry, I think that we're probably at the norm, and the huge spikes that we had seen a year and 2 years ago are probably not going to happen again in the near future. But we've all lived through those ebbs and flows of that natural resource revenue, which is why I caution pressures of spending it into the year-over-year operating. Because if you bake it into your operating budget and then the natural resource prices fall or the volume falls, then you don't know where you're going to get that money to meet your expenses. So this speaks volumes to what I've cautioned now for a number of years.
You said before, when you present the budget, that it's, crops that kind of keep you up at night, and I guess now this has happened.
I'm not there yet, actually, because it keeps me awake at night because budget and the seeds, with budget time, the seed's not all in the ground yet. And so you have no idea what that crop year is going to be. So now I think we're in the position of where we are for this fiscal year, but this doesn't prejudge where we'll be for the next fiscal year.
How do you factor in, if we look at the money for crop insurance claims and then the increased money for wildfire evacuations, so weather related, obviously, there was a hot summer, forecast that, you know, it's not gonna get cooler. So how do we forecast that into the future? And with $1 billion there, if you total those two up, do you factor that in future budgets now, saying that maybe we should set aside this much money for crop insurance or this much money for evacuations? How does that discussion go?
We haven't historically for evacuations. We've used kind of the history over a number of years. For crop insurance, of course, you've got your premiums, both provincial, federal, and the producers have premiums that then goes into the crop insurance fund. And we also reinsure that fund, which we won't have to draw down on or use this year, but we definitely did last year. And we'll continue to reinsure the fund so that it is never, there's never a situation where the farmers will not be fully supported.
Last time I remember such a dramatic budget swing was 2017, or 2016-17, when your government under the previous premier said we need austerity measures. We need to look at wage freezes, we need to look at travel, we need to look at a lot of things we're doing symbolically and otherwise as government. Given the circumstances that we're in right now, would that be your recommendation to your current premier?
Not yet.
Why not?
Because as I said, at that time, we were looking at not the economic strength that we are seeing now. And, you know, we did a number of measures to structurally make our budget more sound, and they were not easy decisions, and we've said that a number of times, where we did strengthen our tax base revenues, and those, they are paying off. It was a pretty substantive increase in both corporate income tax and PST. It's just that the fall in potash eroded it.
It's a little unnerving because you're going in election year, and it's not fun going into, you usually see this budget after election, budget as opposed to before. Is a little unnerving going into the polls with this amount of uncertainty as reflected in the budget?
You know, I think I can't, again, predict what the election will be or what the future budget will be that I've just started to deliberate over, but I still have that optimism, and I have optimism going into election. People are looking at for jobs and opportunity, and I think it's right here in Saskatchewan, and even though there is inflationary pressures, when you look at taxes and utility and housing costs, we're the most affordable province in the country. I think we need to recognize that and be proud of it. And some is efforts of industry in providing those jobs, and I think there will be more jobs with the private sector investments that's been committed going forward. Some of it has been efforts of government by reducing income tax, we did increase the PST, but we still kept it lower, at the lowest in the country other than Alberta, and unfortunately they're our neighbor that we compete with. And having other measures that are more specific to pressures that families may have.
What do you say to those who might look at this budget, knowing that there was $1 billion surplus forecasted in the spring, and think, wow, we're taxed so much, we're taxed to death, and yet we're in a deficit, and this government can't seem to manage its money. So what do you say to those who might have those thoughts?
You know, there's always those, and then on the other side is we haven't spent enough. And that's kind of the world I live in. I cannot remember a day where everyone was satisfied or pleased. I do stand behind and support the spending measures that we took, which is to have a fairly aggressive human resource recruitment plan for our healthcare workers. I think it's needed, but it will cost money. I support our homelessness initiative. I think it's needed, but it will cost money. And so ideally, if you just didn't have to address any of those issues, then we would be sitting in a very lucrative position. But the reason that you want the revenue and that you want growth is so that you can support things like healthcare and education, like we were able to put $40 million into education. And that's the purpose of the growth, and that's the purpose of the strong economy.
This kind of goes to Abby's point he was mentioning earlier, but do you see a point in the future where you increase the budget for agriculture just to weather those potential storms, I guess, in the future where droughts are expected to happen more frequently?
I don't see us doing that now or yet, or even where it'd be necessary, because if you had an average year, quite frankly, the fund would be sitting on a fairly lucrative fund again, which is how it's operated through the years, is through the ebbs and flows of agriculture. And as I said in the past, I've been a producer and lived through those ebbs and flows that are, and I'm not even talking market, that are weather created. The fund sort of builds the surplus in the average or better years, and then it's there for the producers when there is a more problematic year.
You're projecting a $250 million deficit now, but you're still planning to spend $800 million in capital projects. Why not tighten your belt a little bit, maybe push some of those off a year or two so that you can control things a little better?
We will be reviewing, and we always do review the capital plan that we put forward, but there is a number of projects under construction, and so that you can't just stop and pause. And there is no doubt we're seeing a pressure that not just government's seeing, but people that are building homes are seeing, and industry is seeing, of the cost of what you thought the construction would be is more than what you had anticipated. But I think we need to move forward with the capital plan, and there may be some projects ongoing, but that will be slow walked a little bit, but it's a rolling plan any given year of what projects move forward and are advanced, and others that are slow walked.
Have you thought about other sources of revenue to alleviate the situation that aren't sort of traditional taxes or anything else? Is there any, I know you don't want to raise the PSD, I know you don't want to raise income tax, and all the things that you've been trying to go in the other direction, but is there any other things that you can sort of think of that might be more practical, either broad or medium?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now.
What is the plan, or where will the money come from if the government has to remit the carbon tax to the federal government if you're not collecting and having customers pay that?
If we absolutely have to, the plan, of course, right now is we're not remitting, but if it does, it will have to come from the GRF.
Is there room in this budget for the teacher's contract?
It isn't built into the budget, so if the teacher's contract is settled before this end of this fiscal year, we will have the money. And it'll be then reported in whatever quarter that the funds are made available.
Can you specifically list some of the projects that were attended to in this budget that led to the deficit, specifically?
Well, specifically is crop insurance and enhancement to agri-stability, and having a feed program also due to drought is the most significant specific programs, and they're all agriculture in nature.